did you go to school?
And here's your...
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason moron.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink eye? Is this what pink eye is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the me quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Conditional Release program. It's my series of interviews. I've just completed one with the one and only Ray Mooney, and now we're into the second part where we're going to detail the conditions in Pentridge prison in Melbourne and more broadly corrective services around Australia. Ray is a playwright, an artist, a biographer, a novelist. He has taught people creative writing and screenwriting and playwriting. And, of course, as a very young man, you went to Pentridge. We just want to tell us a little bit about that, Ray?
Yeah, sure, Peter. In my early days, the fool I was charged with rape and was guilty and sentenced to 12 years with a minimum of 9, and I served 7.5 years, deserved every day I spent.
Thank you for that. When I was a kid, I grew up in Reservoir, not far from Coburg, where Pentridge Prison was. I mean, the edifice is still there. But when we drive past, and my mother driving often on the way out to the airport, whether it was Essendon or Tullamarine a little bit later, I just remember feeling a sense of dread going past that building. Bluestone College, it was often called, because that's the sort of rock formations you'll get in and around Melbourne at Bluestone. It was a frightening place to behold. What was it like being inside there?
Well, here's an interesting sort of component to your story. Before I was sentenced to prison, I often would be on Pentridge at the time was surrounded by an incredibly high bluestone wall.
Yes.
And it was sort of alongside what we call Bell Street Hill that
Yes.
went up a hill. And as it went up a hill, there was a cemetery, and at the other side of the cemetery, there were houses. And
Yeah.
I can remember as a young teenager getting on the piss and with all my mates, and we'd be up there behind the cemetery looking into Pentridge because you could see right into it from the top of the hill, even though it was a quarter of a mile away. And I was jokingly saying, one of these days I'm going to be the athletic champion of Pentridge as a joke. Well, that bloody was no joke, mate. It turned out I was the athletic champion.
Turned out to be true.
For a few years. Yeah.
You actually established, I guess, the theatre group that became known as the Pentridge Players. You were the founder of.
No, I'd love to say that, Peter.
Right.
I finished up being what's called the president, the person who was in charge for 1 year. But it was already established when I went to prison in 1968. They had a terrific history of producing drama where they had outside directors. This is in A Division. And for those of you who don't know much about Pentridge, Pentridge is segregated into separate divisions. And the main divisions, or there's two main divisions, A Division and B Division. A Division was for first-timers, people who were prepared to conform to rules and regulations. B Division was for what we call the recidivists, or the boobheads, those who were in and out and were known heavy crims. There was C Division and and E Division, and a boys' yard and a psychiatric section.
That was J Division, wasn't it? The J Division, and I think it had its partner, whether it was known as J Division in Ararat. That was where the criminally insane were kept.
That's right.
And I think others in protective custody. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were sent to J Ward Ararat, it was like in that film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Your prison term stopped while you were in J Division Ararat. So if you played up and you were certified, and they did this all the time, and you went to J Ward, your prison term stopped until you came back and were uncertified. Very few people knew about that.
Yeah,
Terrible situation.
You didn't have to be mad to get there, but once you were there for a while, you'd end up being crazy.
I had a mate who was sent there, and he said, I walked in the door, this bastard rushed up and went smash, hit me straight in the face. He said, "You're here for shock therapies." I said, that was the best shock I ever had in my life. But back to the players, the theatre. It was already
Yeah,
established.
when did you develop a love for theatre?
Well, I didn't until I was inside.
Right.
They had already had a theatre company going called Players Anonymous
Right.
that did 2 productions per year. And the productions per year were done in A Division, and they were for outside audiences of around about 3 weeks duration, Monday to Friday. And invited guests came in, and there were seating up to 250 people per night. So it became quite a big deal, the Pentridge Players Anonymous. And when I first went in, I was more into physical fitness and things like that. So I was more interested in when I did join night classes. You're not allowed to straight away go to night classes. You've got to work your way into getting into night classes. Right. I got into a fitness group because I'd sort of been right into fitness, and I really wasn't interested in anything other than sort of doing weightlifting and what have you. And anyway, a bloke who was one of the school teachers said to me, he said, "Look, you're wasting your time, Ray." He said, "Why don't you put it to good sort of effect while you're here? You're going to be here for a long time. Take advantage of it. Get in touch with the classes." So a couple of my friends were in the drama group, and you had to be invited along by another prisoner to join. And one of them invited me along, and there was an outside director called Max Tompkins. Right. He was a very well-known theatre identity.
Yes,
and he was directing a new play called The Creeper at the time, and he liked the look of me and cast me. And I did a couple of productions over the years, and my attitude always was, look, I love what we're doing here, this theatre group, but it was basically set up so that the crims could get access to getting their relatives in when the plays are on, so they could talk to their relatives. So a lot of people sort of use it as a rort. I loved that didn't worry me in the least, but what I wanted to do was I thought it was a great opportunity for us to have a voice. Yes. So I wanted us to start writing our own plays, which I had heard that they were doing up in Sydney at Parramatta, the Resurgence. Yes. Jimmy McNeil and all those people were actually writing their own plays and putting their own productions on. And I loved that idea. So I sort of, in my last year I wrote a play and directed the play and put it on, and that ultimately transferred into me getting invited to join the Victorian College of the Arts, their first ever intake in 1977. So I was part of the first ever intake at the VCA as a result of my work in Pentridge.
Pentridge Players, if we can call it that, it stands in real contrast. I understand that there might have been a rort or two involved. There generally is in prisons. But it stands in real contrast to the way the Australian prison system, not just Victorian, but the Australian prison system operated. We're, perhaps wrongly described as a nation of convicts. That's how this country was colonised.
Yeah.
And it would be wrong, I think, to suggest that our prisons were the brutal places that they were because of that hangover. I mean, essentially what our prisons were a representation of a British prison system transferred to Australia. And by the time you walk through the door at Pentridge, we were still essentially our prison systems had lingered really in the 19th century. Nothing much had changed.
Yeah. Oh, look, and not only that, Peter, you're spot on, but what had happened was our prison system developed along naval lines.
Right.
Many prisoners developed along military lines.
Yes.
And the reason they developed along naval lines that's how prisoners were transported to different countries. Brazil, all those countries where we transported prisoners were done through hulks. We used to keep prisoners in hulks. So the whole discipline was Navy discipline. When I was in Pentridge, there was a real dichotomy between the screws in terms of military and naval. Yes. The governor of Pentridge in my time, Ian Grinley, was a naval man, quite high up. And he used to fight with the Union, who were all military men.
Right.
Incredible. And there was people talk about, it was all to do with Protestants and Catholics and Irish and English. No, it was all naval and military. And we developed. Remember, Australia, as you rightfully said, was colonised by screws.
As a prison, yeah.
They were the first people here. They were screws. Philip was he started out being a spy for Brazil. Remember, he was a spy for the English, spying on Brazil in terms of the two-way interface between convicts and exploiting convicts. No, we had an incredible history that was awesome, and we never talk about it. No one ever, even Robert Hughes hardly goes there.
More broadly, I suppose, we'll get to this a little bit later. One of the axioms is there's no votes in prison reform, and so our prisons remain pretty static. I suspect they've improved. We'll talk about that a bit later. Who did you meet and become friends with in A division or throughout your period in prison? There's some big names. Did you ever have the pleasure of meeting Jockey Smith?
Oh, yes, I knew Jockey really well. I would have known everyone who was there at the time because I had a good job in what was called the amenities section. And the amenities was a place just as you go through Pentridge, anyone who's been through Pentridge, straight to the left, there are these old screws quarters. Well, that's where the amenities used to be. Right. The staff office and the amenities and security used to be in those buildings. And I had a job as the main crim in charge of activities. So I would arrange for outdoor concerts and anything that we used to get in to give prisoners or give to the divisions, all the woodworking, all the hobbies. That was my job. So therefore, I got the opportunity of meeting everyone. I'd go around to all divisions and I got to know everyone. And when people made things, they would normally send them out to their family. If, for example, they made a nice inlaid table or a teddy bear, then the materials that they made them out of would have come through us. And I was the person who would sign them off and make certain they got out. And when I first went there, it was a rort. The guy before me, a famous guy called Les Woon, who did that famous big armed robbery up in Sydney. All right. He had a system going where you had to pay to get anything sent out. You had to pay him. And straight away I stopped that and did it for nothing. And as a result of that, I had a pretty good relationship with most crim. So the Jockey Smiths and I knew them all, 30 kids.
I only mentioned Jockey Smith. I just recall some story. He used to access the prison phones at an internal phone system. And
that's right.
Do little rorts like order himself, corned beef sandwiches and cigarettes and things like that, which would be duly delivered to wherever he was.
Well, that's funny because he probably he learned that one off me because that's what I was doing.
Oh, right.
And putting it on the security officer's bills. True,
yeah.
Because I had access. He didn't have access to phones.
Right.
Jockey never had access to them. But I did.
He did walk out from remand, just walked out.
That's right. And that was a good one. Give me your ticket. Give me your remand ticket. Right. And they gave it to him and he walked straight through the door.
It took me ages to figure out how that worked, but I presume the remand prisoners were not in prison greens or prison uniform.
No, you wore your own clothes if you're in remand.
Yeah, and so that was a bit that threw me, but he'd paid someone to hand him his ticket once he'd come in to visit, and I guess remand people could have more frequent visits and certainly consultation with their lawyers and what have you. And he just grabbed the ticket and wandered out. Of Pentridge.
It was a very good escape, that. No, a good one.
We won't fixate too much about Jockey, but who are the other fellows? We've talked about Chris Flannery in episode 1, but there's another fellow that you considered was a very talented actor, and his name was Stan Taylor, and he was the architect of the Russell Street bombing many years later.
Stan was a great actor, very, very good actor. He was, when I went to prison, he was the wild man, the one that everyone was in fear of. You'll read all this stuff about people down the track saying bullshit, but no, he was the guy, he was the man.
He was the man, tough.
And he spent a long time in H Division. And when he got out of H Division, I was lucky enough to be able to get him down to A Division. And got him involved in the theatre company and university courses, everything. Got him involved in doing things, and he took advantage of it. He wrote a stage play called Victor Yara Compañero that was presented to hundreds of people. It was a fantastic stage play, really good, about the Chilean Allende, the assassination of Allende in Chile.
Yeah, wow.
And that was a big deal.
He was obviously a very bright fellow.
Oh, very good actor.
I know his background, boys' homes, H Division, these sorts of things.
Yeah,
and he ended up being very, very angry man.
Very big, good boxer. Came from a very strong family of boxers.
Right.
And he used to fight, like in the boys' homes, they used to set the kids against each other all the time. And the big attraction of Festival Hall, and back in those days, was that in the in between the main fight, they would put a slug it out, last man standing, last kid standing, all the kids from the boys' homes. And there were two standout guys. Stan Taylor always nearly won, or Lenny Nape would have won from Morning Star Boys Home. But Stan Taylor was the one who they were all terrified of.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the boys' homes and Morning Star in particular. Did you? My listeners would be disappointed if I didn't ask you this question. Did you ever meet? I think you would have been slightly out of time. Chopper Reid.
Yeah, I met Chopper a few times.
What did you make of him?
He wrote some bullshit about Chris, and I challenged him over it. He said that I was in C Division and Chris Flannery barricaded himself in, shit himself because they put me next door to him. And he called him a weak cunt and everything and put him down in one of his books. The truth is, Chopper would have been about 14 or 15 at the time, nowhere near Pentridge.
Yeah,
never met Chris, never met him in his life. So when I had a go at him, I said, mate, I like Chopper. I actually did. I like him. Yeah. Mate, I said, come on. I said, like, why that? He said, I never wrote that. He said, Sylvester wrote it. I said, no.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Chopper a number of times, and I got to know him. And as you say, I quite liked him in an odd sort of way.
Like he was like,
but he was a great storyteller, and fact and fiction would just blend quite easily when he was telling those stories.
Oh, look, the thing that people misunderstand a lot is that one of the most important determinants of where your status is in prison is your ability to tell a good story. That's, it's like around the campfire. Who were the old drovers around the campfire? Yeah. Who were the most liked people? The ones who could tell the stories, the Slim Dusties of the world. They were the important people. Stan was in that category. He could tell good stories, and Chopper Reid was in that category too.
And Chris, we'll get to H Division. We'll talk a bit more about Chris, but it seems to me like the general prison population, whether it was A, B, C, D, they were not particularly brutal places.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And that was the whole thing about H Division. The brutality was confined to H Division. And that meant that the rest of the prison was basically free of genuine and I'm talking about genuine brutality. There were instances of baton charges and all that type of thing, which have been well documented, but not in terms of the ferocious beatings that you got in H Division.
Yeah,
H Division was horrific.
Not as a sort of cultural element of incarceration.
No.
So H Division, and I guess people like yourself in A or B, they would have looked at H Division as a place that you just did not want to go.
Exactly. You were terrified of the place.
Terrified of the prospect.
And anyone who said they weren't were just talking bullshit.
H Division, and I'll just remind our listeners, Ray's got a number of publications out, but the one e-book that he has that relates to this, the Pentridge Archives, which you can buy for the price of a cup of coffee on Amazon as an e-book. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff where our prison systems were really, really out of control, particularly around H Division. Tell me, just go to Amazon and you'll find it all there, all of Ray's works. And they are very, very interesting for those true crime lovers and also for those people who consider prison reform as a fairly important thing in our society. Why was H Division constructed? Was it just like we want to create something that will hold inmates in fear, and when push comes to shove, you'll end up there? Is that it? What was the mentality behind it?
It was always there. Before the official H Division, there were what we call these labour yards where recalcitrant prisoners were sent during the daytime to break rocks. Then they'd go back to their normal divisions of a night time. And in 1958, there was a bad escape where a fellow called Bill O'Mealy shot a warder while he was trying to escape. And there were two of them, he and another guy called Taylor, no relation to Stan Taylor. They were sentenced he already had been sentenced to life in prison, Bill O'Mealy. So they were sentenced to be lashed with 12 lashes of the cat o' nine tail.
He was the last man to be flogged, wasn't he?
Yes, in Australia. But simultaneous to that, they said, right, we need a proper division that houses these intractable types of people who we can't do anything about. But so we have to protect the prison population, the warders, the society from their behaviour. So they set up H Division in 1958. And from 1958 to 1970, it was a terrible place, absolutely terrible, ferocious place. Everyone who went there was flogged. And you knew that if you were in a country prison and you escaped from a country prison, or if you played up in any division and were sent to H Division, you were going to get flogged. So everyone got flogged. There was no, unless the governor ordered not to. And sometimes the governor did. So that's why it had unbelievable terror.
I read on the Pentridge archives that as a rule you would be flogged. I mean, seriously beaten.
Yeah.
Once every 3 days. I mean, it might be more and it might be a little bit less, but generally that was the rule.
That's fair enough, because they had they had a floating population of crims coming in and crims going out. So 1 in 3 makes total sense in terms of 1 in 3 days. Yeah, but you got flogged.
Yeah. You were, well, Stan Taylor was in H Division. We mentioned him before. And you got him to detail his experiences in H Division. Would you just like to summarise those?
Right. I've actually, one of the things because I went to H Division and had a bad time, I asked all the people who I knew who had been through H Division and had given evidence at the Jenkinson inquiry, would they write their story for me, and one day I'd publish it. Okay. And it took a long time, but that's ultimately what I did.
So let's just go back. Let's put Stan to one side. You went in H Division. Under what circumstances did you go? And then tell us about your experiences there.
Right. I was kicking along pretty well in A Division, which we had all the night classes and we had all the things that other divisions didn't have. But there was genuine unrest within the prison system. There had been some terrible floggings in H Division where prisoners were taken out of H Division to hospital, but they had to go through the general prison population. And the prisoners saw it. So there were these incredible riots, in inverted commas, happening, and strikes, not going to work, happening. And this is after the Jenkinson inquiry into brutality. And everyone believed that the Jenkinson inquiry, which was set up by the government to examine brutality in H Division and discipline in H Division, everyone thought it was going to be a whitewash. And to put pressure upon Jenkinson to do the right thing, prisoners decided they wouldn't go to work, they'd strike. Now, A Division had never been on strike ever. And what used to happen every day when you were mustered were the divisions would walk past each other down to the gangs. And they always used to muster A Division first, and A Division would walk past all the other divisions down to the gangs. So A Division never ever went on strike, ever. They'd never had a strike because they were threatened they'd lose their night classes if they did. So word comes to me that the other divisions are all going to strike. They want to put pressure upon Jenkinson to do the right thing and make certain everything's going to be okay. We need to have a meeting to determine what we're going to do. Are we going to go on strike or are we going to stay here? Now, at the time, Grinley, who was the governor, had a prisoners' representative committee where 2 prisoners from each division would meet once a month and talk to him about how the prison was or wasn't effectively running. I was one of those 2 people from A Division. The Prison Officers Union thought Grinley was weak, and they put pressure upon him to disband the Prison Officers Union, which they did. Grinley goes on holiday. The place starts to blow up. There's unrest in the yards. All the other yards send word to us that they're not going to go on strike. They want us to go on strike with them. All the prisoners start carrying on in A Division. The screw comes to me and says, look, will you talk to the men? And, of course, that was a euphemism for talk them out of going on strike. Yeah, and I knew that at the time. So I said, I will on the condition that whatever I do, you accept. And the screw agreed to it. I said, look, are you sure? Because they've disbanded anyone having the right to talk on behalf of other prisoners. No, I'm giving you the right. So I call all the men together, and it's 50-50. You can see it's 50-50. Some of them don't want to be in it because they're there for the rest of their lives. But others do want to be in it. And they said, look, we're going to leave it to you, Ray. I said, are you fair dinkum? I said, yeah. I said, okay, we're on strike. Well, that went over the announcement. I was allowed to talk over the prison radio and tell everyone we're going on strike and blah, blah. That night, my door opens. I'm having a shit. All these screws are outside. Get out, Mooney. Straight down to H Division. So I was down there for 14 weeks. And
how often were you beaten? Well, tell me first about your first contact with H Division, the first 24 hours.
Well, the first 24 hours weren't too bad because I went down over night time and the normal screws weren't on. The ones who were there were the ones who escorted me down. So nothing happened. And this is after the Jenkinson inquiry. And a lot of the screws who had been there during the 60s and the 70s had been moved on. So the place wasn't as violent as it used to be. And we've got to put that into total perspective.
Yes.
So the next morning, my door opens, and in H Division, it's military, absolutely, even though I said naval, it's naval military. Stand to attentions, all this crap, buttons done up, don't do anything until you're given an order, what have you. And I had always said, jokingly, in inverted commas, if they ever send me to H Division, I won't be breaking fucking rocks. Thinking I'd never going to go to bloody H Division.
That was the work. That was the work assigned to all H Division inmates.
There's no way in the world I'm going to go to H Division. I'm a goody two-shoes. Anyway, they get me down in the yards. I'm pushing and shoving because I won't march. I just walk my own pace and just a bit of pushing. But that's nothing. And I expected all that. Open the door, stand on the cross, give your name to the officer in the tower. So I stand on the white cross. They slam the door, closed, and the screw comes along after 5 minutes. And Mooney, sir, he said, right, take the big hammer and you break the big rocks in the small rocks until I tell you not to. I said, excuse me, sir. Well, honestly, I said, look, and I'd worked this one out in advance. I knew this one. I said, one of the things is that if you're a crim, the worst crime you can commit inside a prison is to disobey a lawful order. That's what they regard as the height of rebellion, to disobey a lawful order. I said, I want you to know, go and tell the chief that I am not disobeying the order you just gave me. However, I think your order is putting my life at threat. I'll consider breaking rocks if you get me gloves so I don't get blisters, if you get me a mask so I don't inhale dust, if you get me earmuffs so I don't have to sort of – and I went on 4 or 5 – and this guy's jaws dropped and he's rushed off, Back comes the chief, and I reported exactly the same thing to him. He said, Mooney, he said, look, you'll be breaking rocks. We'll break you. The door opens and in come 2 of these screws, and you have to see them to believe it. Now – this is where you know it. This is where you learn a lot about yourself. It's easy to punch on. Everyone says, oh, you punch. Bullshit. Doesn't matter who you are. In an enclosed area with 2 screws with battens, you're never going to beat 2 screws, no matter who you are or how tough you think you are. And I knew that straight away. And he said, right, pick up the large hand. I didn't move and smash in the kidneys. Everything was in the kidneys. And of course you're pissing blood after. It was terrible. They did that every day. They couldn't get me to break rocks, so at least I learned a lot about myself. And when I was down there, I decided to become a writer. I thought, okay, I will reveal to the world what this is all about, and I did. Yeah, well, so it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
14 weeks there.
14 weeks I was there. Yeah,
beaten pretty much every day.
For the first month, they dropped off after a month.
Dropped down. Okay.
I had a go at a screw, and
And this is, as you said, post the Jenkinson inquiry. Now,
this is Jenkinson inquiry hasn't come out yet.
No, so this is a judicial inquiry. I think it's 1971, 1969,
1972 when the inquiry was held, and 1973 the inquiry report is released at August 1973, just before I go up.
Yeah, so a judicial inquiry was launched into conditions within H Division. What precipitated that inquiry? We just talked about prison reform no votes in it. What were the politics surrounding it?
There were a couple of things that initiated it originally happening. Early, there were two prisoners who had refused to toe the line years ago. A fellow called Bobby Barron, who was really in need of mental assistance, really was, and a fellow called Stephen Sellers, who was no wilting lily. He was as tough as they come, and he refused to do their orders. They couldn't get him out of the place quick enough, because the moment you've got someone who refused, like, the only alternative they've got is to kill you. And in the past, prisoners had been found dead, hung themselves.
It must have occurred.
And we all knew that. Everyone knew it. Stan Taylor reckons he used to barricade his cell every night, put his bedding up against the door just in case they came in during the night, or they drugged his food. Everyone knew that.
Well, so the Jenkinson inquiries precipitated. Well, I think Chris Flannery had a large part to do with it. Certainly,
sorry, you asked a really good question. What precipitated it? Yes, Chris Flannery. He'd been down there 5 times previously, and the first time he went down there, he was 18, and they smashed the shit out of him. If you read his story as he wrote it, is in The Ethics of Evil, and it's one of the reasons why I wrote the play Every Night. It's taken from his story and Stan Taylor's story, taken from both their stories.
So the ethics of evil is another one of the ebooks, and I've read sections of that.
Well, that's the book on Hates Division.
Yes,
the Ethics of Evil, Stories of Hates Division. And all their stories that I collected, I put in there. Anyway,
Chris couldn't remember how many times he'd been beat.
He'd been down there 5 times, and this was the 6th time. And they had decided to go down there to take the place on. It's not a sort of that's not what. It's easy to say that, but it's never like that when it actually happens.
No.
He refused to do anything when he got down there, and they were smart enough not to bash the shit out of him this time, because Chris's brother was Ed Flannery, his stepbrother, was Ed Flannery, who was part of the Council for Civil Liberties.
Yes.
And he was in charge of the prisons section. And he was stirring the media outside, and the media were very interested in finding out as much as they could, because the Jenkinson inquiry had gone on for nearly a year with information being in the papers all the time. So people started to know about this place. Anyway, Chris goes down there and he refuses to do anything. He won't, goes on a hunger strike. They do everything they can to prevent him. And that was a catalyst that later on some of his mates came down to assist, and they took the place on and ultimately destroyed Hates Division. They got the hammers and broke through the walls and flooded the place. Wow. Over a couple of months, they destroyed the place. And it was never the same again. So whenever you read all these stories about Chopper spent so long in Hates Division, there was no bashing when he was down there. It had all gone. The real bash had actually gone. It was a different place altogether. In fact, Chopper's on record as saying, I never got touched once when I was down there.
Yeah.
He's on record as saying
it was a different place. But
totally different place. And they set up Jika and transferred the hard nuts from Jika to Jika, which was a psychological place.
The New South Wales prison system went through the same. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the Jenkinson inquiry, it may have had its recommendations and so forth, but essentially what happened is some of the sadistic guards that you mentioned generally were quietly removed from service. Yes, is that right?
Absolutely.
So
mainly promoted.
H Division remained. There was no prospect of that changing, but these sadists were all sort of quietly removed from service, were quietly removed from employment, retired out, and what have you.
None were ever charged. Jenkinson never ever found against any screw who was down in Hates Division that they should be charged. No one was ever charged. There was someone from D Division who finished up going to the magistrates' court, a screw there, but they dropped those charges straight away. So like all inquiries, like the Gobbo inquiry, the Beach inquiry, nothing ever happens.
Yeah, not a lot happens, but it creates awareness. I suppose that was the difference.
It put them on record. put the world on record that this is what was happening in H Division. And simultaneously in New South Wales, you had the Nagel inquiry, where
Yes.
what happened in the Jenkinson inquiry was the only people who were complaining about brutality were prisoners who had been brutalised. None of the religious people gave evidence. None of the doctors did give evidence, but they never gave negative evidence. Up in Sydney, there were some screws who got up and admitted that they had bashed crims, and that was when the shit did hit the fan. And that was an incredible sort of indictment on the whole system. So Sydney had a real good, like it was a real revelation what happened in Sydney. And if you read Bernie Matthews' wonderful book, Intractable, the whole history of it's in there.
Mm. Bernie Matthews is, a person I met some years ago, deceased now, but Bernie was, I guess you'd call him a career crim. He couldn't get away, but a wonderfully talented writer and a person who in person was really an intriguing person, great empathy. He wasn't perhaps a showboater like Chopper was. He had stories to tell.
Prisons produced some very good writers. We had the best one who went through the H Division, John Killick. John Killick's writings are masterful. The stuff that he's got to say about what happened to him and how he outlines the whole scenario is sensational. And that'll be around for generations to come. All of John's books are revelationary.
The thing about writing, Ray, these guards, obviously, the guards that were let go after the Jenkinson inquiry, they were obviously brutal sadists, but it's not just their existence that created H Division.
No.
I'm wondering whether people, guards with that particular bent, sadists, big men, brutal, whether they were actively courted by the system to go and work in H Division.
Totally, 100%.
And that had been going on for 100 years, presumably. Yeah.
100%. And they brag about it. The people who worked in H Division, you look at the size of them, they brag about it.
Yeah.
They were sort of probably good fighters in their own right, who knows, but they definitely never had a one-out fight in their life.
Often ex-military, as you say.
Yeah, totally military. Look, they were chosen for their attitude and lack of empathy and their preparedness to bend the rules, work outside the system, because it was illegal to bash prisoners. Totally illegal. There was no legality in terms of what they did. It was all illegal.
Well, you mentioned New South Wales system before. There are so many similarities. And Bernie Matthews' book, Intractables. The Intractables were all sent up to Grafton. Grafton was the hellhole, wasn't it? And that was where Ray Denning, I don't know if you've read any of Ray's writings, Ray Denning was sent there. It was declared an intractable. They had a somewhat different system. If you were declared an intractable, you ended up at Grafton.
Yeah.
And they talked about what they call the jacaranda.
The network.
Yeah, it was just sort of I believe the Grafton prison, it's still there today. I think they're going to sell it off. But there was a long row of jacaranda trees in the drive up to the Grafton prison, and they called it the jacaranda initiation. It was the sort of initiation biff that would go on for anyone who got in there, because your skin would turn the colour of the jacaranda blossoms after enough beating. And Ray Denning was beaten savagely to the point where other inmates allowed him to escape. It's an interesting story in itself, because Ray was a sort of student of prison reform for a very long time. After his escape from Grafton, I think he also escaped from Maitland as well. He escaped from a number of places. He was pretty capable at escaping. And he remained on the run there. I think he was on 60 Minutes while he was on the run. I know 3 people, and I won't name them because one of them's a dear friend who actually looked after him while he was on the run. And they're all fairly senior people, mate, in the judiciary and politics and what have you. But then New South Wales, like Victoria, brought in this prison within a prison concept, the JICAs, or in the case of what do they call it in New South Wales? I've just lost the name of it, but they had the prison within a prison in Long Bay.
Yeah, Conditional.
Conditional. And of course, Russell Cox was the only one to have escaped from there, incredibly fit and strong bloke who was able to get through there. But these places, I've talked to inmates who were in there, and they said it was like living in a submarine. You'd never have fresh air, you'd never have sunlight, these sorts of things. And they both, well, in the case of Conditional, it was closed, and then it was reopened when a Liberal government was elected. It was closed under the Rand administration, or a Rand government, and then reopened by the Liberal government, and then closed again because it was such a bloody hellhole. And JICA, of course, ended tragically when a fire was started by the inmates, led to the deaths of inmates in JICA, and these places were closed down. It just seemed to me that there were governments or politicians involved who thought, let's see how much we can basically destroy people at a moral level to see what will happen.
Yeah, it's sad because, the oversight was lax, and unfortunately,
no one cared. See, that was the thing. No one cared. There's always been this intrigue and curiosity about criminals and intractables and all that sort of, but no one cared about what was happening.
Well, those who did care were sort of like labelled radicals and therefore not to be taken seriously.
Those three people who were looking after Ray, and I won't name them, they became very, very senior people in the political and legal world.
Yes.
So they took a great risk on Ray. But it's extraordinary to me that New South Wales and Victoria, those governments, had almost simultaneously decided to build these horrendous prisons. In the case of JICA, it took about 5 minutes for a guard to actually open all the electronic gates.
Yeah, no.
So anything that went on in there, including this fire that ultimately led to its closure, it would take forever to act to put the fire out in this case.
Yeah, and the fumes from the mattresses were toxic.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Spot on.
So I guess the question is, we've talked about H Division and just how brutal it was, and it had been going on 100 years, and it attracted sadists like a magnet. Where did we learn all this from? And why don't we care that people were subject to these terrible indignities and torment?
Yeah. Look, I track some of it back to the boys' homes and the girls' homes situations where we adopted the Borstal system from Ireland, where we put people in charge of, like potential crims in charge of other crims. And here's what a lot of people misunderstand about boys' homes. The people who went through boys' homes a lot of them became ferocious fighters. And the reason they did was they were fighting every day of their lives. Yeah. Every day of their lives, they were fighting. And some of them, that's why the Chris Flannerys of the world became ferocious. Yeah. And like they did, he didn't look as if butter would melt in his mouth, but he could fight. No, he would have been king of the
good-looking style of a bloke. And as you pointed out in our first part, I think about 175 centimetres tall, so not a big bloke.
He's not a big bloke, but they fought every day in the boys' homes. That's what it was. Yeah. You were either belted and then you grew into a sort of situation where you fought back. And after a while you became the bully because that's how you got respect. Yeah. That's how you earned peer respect in those places. It was all, we're talking about cultures where the best fighters are at the top of the pecking order, always. Prisons have always been about that. The best fighter in prison is always at the top of the pecking order, always.
So we had this system across Australia where we had boys' homes for kids who had committed relatively minor offences. We're talking about theft, might be theft of a motor vehicle, might be a break and enter. If they've got a little bit of a record, in the case of Chris, that was the case, a little bit of thieving, property crime, and then I think theft of a vehicle saw him go to Morningstar.
When they picked him up, the police, he was 14 years old. He was sitting on a cushion in the car he had stolen. He was on a cushion. That's how small he was.
Just 14. So he could see over the
And the Franciscan friars gave him a terrible time.
I think there's a story there that he escaped from Morningstar. Now, Morningstar, I think it's down in the Mornington Peninsula.
Mount Eliza.
Mount Eliza. And it's now a wedding reception centre. You like getting married at an Indian burial ground. But anyway, you actually visited Morning Star with Chris when you were both adults.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'd done the 2 plays on him, and I wanted to sort of do the petrol story, but I also wanted to do his life story in the boys' homes. So I arranged for us to go down on a Sunday afternoon and for him to show me around Morning Star, which he did. And he showed me where they used to make him weed the garden with a table fork and push a stone up and down on cobbles and stand behind the TV watching all the people watching the TV. Some of the things they did were just out of this world.
Yeah, and this, well, look, they were government-funded facilities, but it was actually run by the Catholic Church.
No, that was run by the Franciscan friars.
Yeah, well,
which is Catholic Church, yeah, sure, but like Jesuits more than yeah. Anyway, we're there. He's showing me around, and I see 4 or 5 cars speeding up this long driveway because it's a long driveway down at Morning Star, the boys' homes, and I said to Chris, "We could be in a bit of trouble here, mate." He said, "Nah, fucking, we'll give it to them." So I'm thinking this might be the last day on earth. Anyway, they all jump out, and luckily, one of the guys there I recognised, and he's the president of the Footscray Football Club. And I used to work for Collingwood as their fitness advisor. So I knew everyone. And Conan, I think was his name. And anyway, we started talking and I said, what's with all the bloody security people? He said, well, Ray, he said, we've only had it for a year because it only closed down a year ago.
It had been closed,
They killed a kid and they were forced to close it down on the condition that there'd be no publicity. And they did. They closed it down, no publicity. He said, every night, all these kids who have been through Morning Star keep coming back and smashing the place up. Yeah. He said, I've got to protect it. That told me everything. That told me everything about human nature.
There was another great story that you told me years ago.
At the cross.
That you were in B Division with Chris and you're in the yard, exercise yard, and there was a call came through that Chris had a visitor.
Yeah, this was A Division, actually. It was A Division.
A Division.
Yeah.
My apologies. And so he went to see who his visitor was. And then he came back, tell me if I've got any of this wrong, and he was absolutely fuming, and you weren't quite sure whether to...
Well, he was ashen-faced. He was really ashen-faced and fuming.
Go on.
No, go on, because you're telling it right.
Oh, well, you I guess after a while you would have known Chris had a pretty fiery temper, but you were curious and you wanted to know. I guess it's one of those things being in prison. It was an out of the order, out of the normal schedule of the day, so you were curious as to who his visitor was. And you asked him. And he said, who was your visitor? And he said, Father such and such.
Gerard, Father Gerard.
Father Gerard. Yeah. And he said, what did he? And you asked him, what did he want? And and Chris said, he wanted me to forgive him. And you asked him, what'd you tell him? And he said, you told him to get fucked. So that tells me immediately that Chris was indecently dealt with by this priest.
No doubt in the world.
Worse.
No doubt in the world.
Because he was quite a small guy too.
Oh, he and good looking. Very good looking.
Rich for the picking by these bastards. Yeah.
I've seen letters that Gerard wrote. Gerard or Phillips. I just forget if it's Gerard or Phillips. Might be Phillips, Father Phillips.
Right.
He wrote to Chris asking for forgiveness, true.
And there's, at that stage, Chris would have been perhaps 14.
Yeah, he was 14 when he went in.
I also heard the story that Chris actually escaped from Morning Star.
Yeah,
or took off. Escape's probably not the right word. And he went home. And I guess in Brunswick where his mother lived, and she took him back home, took him back to Morning Star on the train, and she would not have known. Chris doted after his mother, didn't he? He loved his mother dearly, but she would not have known the sort of abuse that he was subject to.
It was in the days where you never talked about it, and you never. And plus, you didn't want to give anyone up. Like if he admits that he's giving them up, and that wasn't part of the culture.
I mean, Len McPherson in his later life, he used to speak publicly about how he was sexually abused at Gosford Boys' Homes because people like Chris and McPherson and Stan Smith, who was one of the most colourful criminal identities in Australia in the 60s and 70s, George Freeman, Ned Smith, I could go on. there's just so many of them who've been put through these. Even Chow Hayes in the second decade of the 20th century went through Gosford, and in this Borstal system, transplanted from the UK, the senior kids, the 16 and 17-year-olds, would be handing out the discipline to the younger kids, and that often involved physical and sexual abuse.
Totally.
So Len used to talk about it in his later life. You could tell he was angry about it. And one thing you can see from all of these guys' development, including Chris, is by the time they hit 25, they've usually done a jail as an adult. And by the time they get out from that, they are furiously angry with society and determined that they will never be a victim again. Other people will be their victims. That's a fair summary, isn't it?
I think that is very close to the theory that we refuse to look at. You know, like we refuse to sort of excuse the Stan Taylors or the Chris Flannerys of the world because of the terrible crimes they've done. But if they had been returning war victims that had been completely, you know, like traumatized by the war, we would understand it and we'd put them into situations where we would do everything we could to help them. We do nothing, absolutely nothing. For all those people who went through Hates Division or flogged and Grafton, we do nothing. We pretend it never happened.
Well, Ray Denning went through the boys' home system too, although he was pretty much running free at 15. He'd gone, you may know the story, his mother was expecting the return visit of Ray's father, and he was a brutal man, and she committed suicide by immolation. She set fire to herself in front of Ray, and Ray wrote afterwards, she didn't scream and I didn't cry. Yeah. Now, today, a person like Ray who would experience that you would like to think receive all the sorts of psychiatric care he could possibly get to try and resolve that issue. But in those days, and we're not that long ago, these kids were just left to run free.
Oh, and look at all the footballers and boxers who have suicided or had trouble with sort of Parkinson's or mental health issues as a result of their fighting in the ring and what have you. We don't do anything for those people who experience the unbelievable brutality. And you've got to see it, you've got to read about it to believe how brutal it was. Yeah. It wasn't just a flogging. It was a flogging until you were unconscious. That was the whole deal.
And those men who went through who went through Gosford, who went through Maitland, who went through Long Bay, and boys' homes preceding that, had become inured to beatings. And then, you know, it's no wonder. I mean, look, they're in a violent business of crime anyway, but it's no wonder that they have very limited life expectancies.
Totally.
And outside of that, just from a physiological perspective.
And a lot of the girls experience terrible situation in paramedic. Like in some of those books that have just come out now from people who went through those systems that have been writing about it, they're brilliant. Like, it's such an eye-opener. And this is our past. It's part of our past. Now, I'm in no way trying to say, anyone who's listening to what we're talking about should feel guilty. I'm just saying, put it into context. You know, it's part
understand.
Of
just understand the history. Culture. Understand the history. And look, a number of years ago, when we first started doing the conditional release program, we talked about the Monster Factory and we talked about boys' homes. For me, the extraordinary thing is that society would have expected these people to be somehow reformed through brutality. Yeah. And clearly that was never going to happen. And for all the Chris Flannerys and Len McPhersons and the violence and the social cost of crime, there are so many other people who were just left in sort of vegetative states beyond that, who were never able to contribute to society because they were either beaten and traumatized to the point where they couldn't make a contribution. Yeah.
They're important points. Peter.
It's tough times. And like I say, no votes in prison reform. And if you do have prisons that, and unfortunately we don't have enough of this, where where people who go into them have perhaps a capacity to train, become employable, and then perhaps even given a lift into a job once they release. The Victorian government under Stephen Bracks actually did do these things, was actually developing systems for kids who, or for young men and women who go to jail, so that they will come out and they will be able to earn a living and have some dignity. And you know what was happening? The recidivism rates started declining.
Yeah.
And then there was a change of government and they scrapped all those programs and bang, up she went again.
And the other thing that they had to fight against at the time was the attitude of ball and chainers in the prison officers' unions. They didn't want it. And
indeed in the media who love a good story about soft runs for crooks and, hotel rooms with a TV and all this sort of stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, if you want to go and live, if you think it's going to be soft in there, go and set up a television in your bathroom and go and live there for 23 hours a day.
Well, the sociologists say do that in the Hilton Hotel. See how many years you can last.
Yeah.
Really.
We got to get these things. We do need to get these things right. There's a really important stat, and I mentioned it to you yesterday. If you are sentenced, or if a male, I'm not sure about the females, let's stick with the males. If a male is sentenced to a prison term of 2 years or more, the likelihood that they will, once released, will reoffend and be returned to prison is around about 2/3, 66%.
Terrible, isn't it?
So magistrates and judges often do these things. And I know some of us get frustrated and say, well, he should have copped a longer stretch, or he should have copped a stretch and he didn't, and all this sort of stuff. But the simple fact of the matter is what's called the criminogenic effects of incarceration. That you going to jail creates a certain likelihood that you will reoffend, and often in worse cases. So the social cost of that crime to victims and to society, to insurers, we can actually put dollar figures on these things. Yeah. The best way to get these, and you often see this with young offenders, this young guy's third offence. We don't know who he is. He doesn't get named, but why is he allowed out and about? There's this kind of conversation going on in Victoria right now about youth offenders.
Yeah.
And the answer from the media will be, and that translates into public opinion, let's go harder on these kids. Let's create a brutal environment for them.
Yeah.
So when they come out at 18 and then reoffend and come out at 25, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, no. We have a very potpourri attitude towards crime and punishment in Australia. We've never had genuine crime symposiums where we've effectively worked out what is punishment about, what should it be about, what's discipline about, is rehabilitation part of it? If it is, how do we best do it? What's the legal system? How best to have a proper overview of crime and punishment in Australia? We've never done it. We're state by state. We keep on passing stupid legislation. Like at the moment, I watch what's happening in the crime statistics in Victoria, where there's a lot of people being picked up with machetes, and arguably they've been bailed time and time again.
Yeah.
And no one looks at the potential truth that the magistrates are playing terrible games. The magistrates have the power that if in their consideration anyone is likely to reoffend, they have the right now to block bail. But what do? They play this thing about, oh no, my hands are tied, I have to let him go. And that's a whole political crap going.
Yeah, so you bring in new bail laws. Happening in New South Wales, same sort of thing. And you had kids. Terrible. You had kids who've been charged with relatively minor offences, right? And they're bailed, and they're given terms on their bail which they are found to breach. This is the New South Wales bail laws, which have since been revoked only recently or amended. So you'll have that kid go in and he's got a curfew and he breaches the curfew, and then under these bail laws, automatically he will be incarcerated, he or she. And don't even get me started on Indigenous rates of incarceration in this country. The Indigenous rate of incarceration for women in the New South Wales
Crazy.
prison system
It's
is
crazy.
one half.
Yeah,
50% of
crazy.
that population are Indigenous women. So here we have them charged with an offence, not convicted, breached their bail, and then under these new bail, or under these what are now old bail laws, they are incarcerated and await trial on the original offence, which can take 12 to 18 months. So they are in that system, incarcerated, come out, might even get off, might get time served, and they're going to be angry because these are brutal places.
How hard would it be to have an overriding philosophy of let's look at culturally where everyone's at? Can we get them involved in the proper sport?
Yeah.
Can we get them involved in the arts? What can
Yeah.
we do to make certain that they get qualifications? How can we get peer group associations in a way where we learn to respect each other? We don't go anywhere near that. Nowhere near it.
No.
And I just keep looking, and it's all like, and the media are the worst of the offenders of all because they never go below the surface. They love the reporting of, another guy was caught with a machete.
Yeah,
in a
another young
shopping
one,
centre.
another scandal, another outrage. Yeah.
No, it's sad, very sad.
It is indeed. And your stories, Ray, you've lived the most brutal form of incarceration that a government in Australia would allow, or even allowed without any scrutiny for a while. So it's been wonderful having you here. Can you just run me through? I'm a little confused. Can you just run me through your current ebooks, particularly the one that's relating to, so The Ethics of Evil is available on ebook through Amazon. Costs you, I think, about the price of a cup of coffee.
I've written about 7, I think, ebooks. By the way, I have a website that if you just go to the website, raymooney.com, they're all there. But the easiest way is if you go to Amazon and just print ebooks by Ray Mooney. I only do them as ebooks because I bypass publishers. Publishers aren't interested really in the type of stuff I write. Plus, I don't want to edit them down to nothing. I want them to be there for generations to come so that the facts are available to other people. So The Ethics of Evil, Stories of Hate's Division, that's about Hate's Division.
Yes.
The one on Chris, Shovel 1 is
Shovel 1. I have not read
Loxley
that
case
one.
about Chris.
And I must.
And that's got all the information we talked about. Gangsters with Badges is about the truth about what happened during the Walsh Street killings. A Pack of Bloody Animals that I wrote with John Kerr was also about Walsh Street, but that was written prior to A Pack of Bloody Animals. I've written a couple of books on how to write, the art of writing, tricks and techniques, and writing for screenplays. They're all different stories I've written. Plus, I've rewritten Green Light as 3 separate ebooks because A Green Light was 900 odd pages. So I totally rewrote the book, and it's in 3 ebooks. The Kingdom of Children, which is about my growing up and going to prison. The Kingdom of Man, which is about me being in prison and Chris Flannery being in prison. And The Kingdom, which is about Chris being in the wider world, working down at Mickey's and being involved as a hitman. And they're
look,
all under $5.
And to our listeners, this is extraordinary material. In fact, Ray is an extraordinary man. We're very, very lucky to have him on. We might have you back just to talk about Chris's into the Sydney crime scene and how that led to his downfall.
Yeah.
Being declared dead by the coroner. Disappeared on 9th of May 1985. According to the coroner, killed by person or persons unknown. We might want to explore some of the things there. But Chris basically picked himself up, was dragged, really, as we've described, under the on the first part of our interview with Ray, charged with the murder of Ray Loxley, which took him straight into a den of iniquity, mate, where the Rogersons and various other hoods, including a gang known as the Team. We've mentioned Stan Smith, and we've mentioned George Freeman and Len McPherson, and these guys ran the place like they owned it.
Yeah. Okay,
It'd be good to have you on to have that, but it's just been wonderful to talk to you about these things, particularly about prison reform, because it's something our society doesn't really want to talk about all that often. Thank you, Ray.
I appreciate it, Peter. Good on you, mate. Take care.
Good on you, mate. Cheers.
You're the one.